couple like weird baby stories on this video. But he marries her anyway because he has to get out of the fucking forest. I picked what I think is the most me book that has ever existed in the world. What's up everyone? It's Bells. Welcome back to my channel. It's Pride Month. We are doing a 2S LGBTQIA+ themed month of reading. I'm super pumped. All of these books I'm really excited about. Before we jump in, don't forget to comment any LGBTQ books that you are reading currently. If you have read any of these books and you want to share your thoughts on them, I always love to know what you guys are reading in the next month. It is one of my favorite parts about making these videos. We got lots to get through, so let's bring on the books. So as always, you guys are so used to this by now, my Tarot of the Divine tarot card deck by Yoshi Yoshitani is inspired by deities, folklore, and fairy tales from around the world. And truly, these are just some of the most beautiful cards I've ever seen. The link is below if you guys want to go and purchase it for yourselves. We'll go quickly over the rules. Each card is equal to one book. If I get a reversed card, I pick up an extra card. Last month I only had a few, and the month before that I stopped at 8. I just kind of like let the cards take me this month because I want to read as many of these lovely books as possible. In the Google Doc below, I also have all of the prompts if you want to play along, and let's get started. So the first card that I pulled was the Six of Coins. So the story represented here is the woman who was kind to insects. This is an Inuit fable where one winter an old woman was left behind in her tribe's summer campground. She was too old to move again. She wasn't able to help with the preparation of goods, and so her family left her with a little food to last her last couple of days, a few small insects, and they left to their winter campground. The woman decided to herself after they left, I'm not going to eat these poor little creatures. I am old and perhaps they are young, perhaps even a few are children. So she set the insects free from their cages where they had been trapped. The next day, a fox entered her hut and started to bite her. The old woman thought that because of that, it was her time to die, but she noticed that the fox was biting her really strangely, like nipping her in places all around her body, and the fox nipped and bit until all of her skin fell away, and below was a new skin that belonged to a young woman. The insects that she had released had been so grateful for their freedom, they asked their friend the fox to bring the woman a new life. The next summer, when their tribe returned, they did not find the woman's body or her bones as they expected. The story suggests that she went to live with the insects after they freed her, perhaps marrying a blowfly who she had grown quite fond of. That story just makes me smile. So the Six of Coins, this is a card of generosity, giving and receiving wealth, as the story suggests. This card, when it comes up, is like giving you the push to be generous. On the other side of things, you might be on the receiving end of getting wealth or gifts, and this card is suggesting you should work on accepting those gifts with gratitude and use those gifts to get yourself on your feet, become self-sufficient. My prompt for 6 cards is a book that is under 300 pages, and for coins, something that is tense or funny. So the only book I had on my list that matched both of those were Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. Now this was released last year, but it is getting republished and had a 19-week waitlist. Instead, I picked Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper, which is 313 pages, so it's like close enough, I think. This is about Emmy, who is a witch who hasn't been home in a while because she doesn't want to run into her ex, but there's basically like a spell casting tournament that her family runs, and her family guilts her into coming home for it. She meets this other gal, Talia, who just broke up with the same ex for cheating on her, and Talia and Emmy's like best friend want Emmy to help get revenge on this boy. A revenge plot ensues, but it's also a sapphic romance, which we love. Look, witches and a sapphic romance, I'm not mad about it. So that's the first book that I'll be reading, and that was what I picked for the Six of Coins. The next card that I pulled was the Four of Cups. The story represented here is The Nightingale, which is a Danish folktale. The Emperor of China lives in a porcelain palace near a forest where a nightingale sings so beautifully that every traveler that passes through mentions it. The emperor eventually asks the bird to be brought to him, and when he hears the bird singing, he is so enamored he's moved to tears and decides to keep the nightingale in the palace. So the bird lives in a cage but is allowed to fly outside 3 times a day attached to a thread so that she doesn't fly away. The bird and her song become very famous. One day, this emperor receives a gift of a jeweled mechanical nightingale that can sing the same song over and over without getting tired. The court winds up being more impressed with the mechanical bird than the real nightingale. The nightingale takes the opportunity to disappear. After a year of constant use, the mechanical bird breaks down, and then about 5 years later, the emperor is very sick, and death comes for him with a lot of people that surround his bedside, both beautiful and ugly, that symbolize the emperor's good and bad deeds. The people all begin speaking at once, and the emperor asks for the mechanical bird to sing to drown out the noise, but it stays quiet. However, the real nightingale returns and sings such a beautiful song that Death himself is moved and allows the emperor to live. The nightingale agrees to stay with the emperor after this, but only if she is allowed to fly free and observe the people of China. The card, the Four of Cups, suggests that even though new opportunities are coming to you, it is okay to turn them away if they don't align with your future vision. It may also indicate a time of like turning inward or reflection, even double checking things before accepting them. If it pops up in a spread, basically it's time to do some inward thinking on like what actually benefits you in your life. The prompt that I have for 4 cards is a classic book, and for cups it is something emotional or sad, and so I picked The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This is about 2 African American sisters in early 20th century Georgia who were separated as children and stay connected through letters. I know that there's some real hefty trigger warnings in this one, particularly about domestic abuse. I think it's gonna be pretty heavy, but I've heard about this story my whole life and I'm very excited to listen to it. We've got a lot of like heavy books coming up in this spread this time around. That's why I'm happy I have like a couple silly ones, like Payback's a Witch is gonna be a nice like in between for these heavier stories. That was what I picked for the 4 of Cups. So the next card that I pulled was Strength Reversed. And the story that's represented here is Tam Lin. This is an old Scottish fairy ballad about a mortal woman, Janet. I know, her name is Janet. Who encounters the fairy knight Tam Lin in a forbidden forest. They're lovers, she becomes pregnant, and on Halloween, Janet heads out into the forest to pick herbs to induce an abortion because she doesn't want to carry this child by herself. Tam Lin appears and asks her not to pick the herbs, and she's basically like, fuck you, I'm not gonna do this by myself, and you're here in the forest. Tam Lin says that he wants to help her raise the child. He is actually a mortal man who has been kidnapped by the fairy queen to be sacrificed on Halloween to hell as a tribute. But Janet can save him if she can manage to pull him off of his horse and like basically hold him until the midnight procession has passed. Long story short, Janet is able to do this. The fairy queen turns him into a bunch of beasts and like fires to hurt Janet, make Janet let go of him, but she does not, and proves that Tam Lin belongs to Janet, belongs to her, and not to the fairy queen. The queen releases Tam Lin, but says that if she knew this was going to happen, she would have turned Tam Lin into a tree. Which I think is really funny, but also like really progressive for a fairy tale. The card Strength. Strength is strength. Inner strength and courage, compassion, all those lovely things. When it is reversed, you might need to bring that confidence into balance one way or another. You might be lacking in self-confidence, have low energy. It's basically like do some self-care. The prompt that I have for the Strength card is an intimidating book, and I feel like you can all guess what book I'm gonna pick. And this is gonna be A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which follows 4 college classmates throughout their life in New York, held together by the deeply traumatized Jude. Some people call this the most triggering book they've ever read. It's like 800 pages long. I feel like it's been all over BookTube, and so I am excited to read it. I'm nervous to read it, but yeah, this is definitely an intimidating book for me. I know it's probably gonna take some time, and that is what I picked for the Strength card. The next card that I pulled was the Wheel of Fortune, which means we get to spin the Wheel of Fortune. Yay. The figure represented here is Anansi, who is an African trickster spider god, who is also called the King of Stories. So he's often found in tales throughout West Africa and the Caribbean, and basically they use the story of Anansi and his trickster ways to symbolize a resistance to powerful slave owners. He's a really prominent figure in a lot of different stories that all focus on him, basically using his intelligence to triumph against bigger and larger creatures to pass knowledge and moral messages to younger generations. We can also see this like in American Gods. The name Anansi was adapted to Aunt Nancy. I'll double check that. But like, we see this figure a lot. It's a very, very popular folktale figure. The Wheel of Fortune is a card. It's the Wheel of Fortune, obviously. So good luck, good karma, destiny. It is a reminder life is always going. Things are always changing. If things are difficult, it will get better. That is just life. And also, if things are going well, life is going to go back to normal. It's not going to go well forever. The prompt that I have for the Wheel of Fortune is a random pick off of my TBR and to spin the wheel. So what I did for the random TBR picks, I just put every single LGBTQ book that I had on my list onto a wheel without everything else that I'd like already picked for this. What it landed on was, amazingly and surprisingly, the picture of Dorian Gray, which I'm super excited to read. This is about a man who sells his soul for eternal youth, and the book was used as evidence against Oscar Wilde when he was tried for homosexuality, which was at the time called gross indecency in 1895. So again, classic that I've been really excited to read, that I obviously have on my shelf. An important book, I think, in just like talking about LGBTQ literature, especially historically. So I'm excited to read that. And then of course, I also spun the Wheel of Fortune and got pick an extra card, which I will put at the very end of this little spread. And that was what I picked for the Wheel of Fortune. So the next card that I pulled was the reversed Page of Swords. Now, we have covered Princess Parizade quite a bit on this channel. I just pull this card a lot, which I think is really interesting. As a refresher, this is the story with her desiring 3 magical objects for her garden, and then after both of her brothers fail, she goes on to succeed and free them from the imprisonment they found themselves in, etc. So because I've talked about that a little bit, I wanted to talk about the backstory of this one this time, which is called The Story of the 2 sisters who were jealous of their younger sister. Real subtle. This is a very long story that I am condensing significantly. But basically, the Sultan, as a young man, was like wandering around the city dressed as a commoner just for funsies. You know how rich people just do that sometimes. And overhear 3 sisters talking about who they want to marry. The eldest wanted to marry the Sultan's baker, the middle wanted to marry the Sultan's head cook, and the youngest wanted to marry the Sultan himself. He thought it would be fun to just grant these wishes. Freudian slip right there. He thought it would be fun to grant those wishes. I'm sure it didn't hurt that the youngest girl was very pretty. Of course, they had like a really magnificent wedding, but the older sisters were very jealous of the girl and decided to have their revenge. So when the Sultana became pregnant, the older sisters basically inserted themselves into the court to help support her through her pregnancy. And when the baby was born, they sent the child into a cradle down a canal, then told the Sultan that the girl had given birth to a puppy. This happened 3 times before the Sultan never questioned this, I guess, but the Sultan instead like banished the poor girl to a literal box where all passersby were ordered to like spit on her face. So that's pretty shitty. But the 3 children, the actual like 3 children that were sent down the canal, were brought up by one of the palace officials who just like kept the children, even though the Sultan was obviously being told that his wife was giving birth to dogs. I don't know how all that works out. Those 3 children grew up to be Parizade, Bahman, and Purvis, and you know their story of the 3 magical objects and how they returned to the Sultan's palace. The actual card, the Page of Swords, represents new ideas, curiosity, and enthusiasm, but when it's reversed, you might be holding back from expressing your truth, your opinions outwardly. I would definitely say that this card is suggesting you reflect on like why you aren't expressing this truth or these opinions and what might benefit you in doing so in the future. The prompt that I have for page cards is a YA book, and for swords, something informative or challenging. The book that I picked for this prompt was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This was not considered informative or challenging. I didn't have a particular book that fit that on my list, but it was more important that I picked like a YA LGBTQ book versus not. So yeah, this book is a sapphic romance set in Chinatown in 1954, primarily focused around a lesbian bar called the Telegraph Club. And I'm just so excited for some historical fiction. I've been like really itching for like historical romance. This is like the aesthetic I've been craving. I know I'm always disappointed when I read young adult books, but I have high hopes for this one. I'm coming in with an open mind. So that's what I picked for the Page of Swords. The next card that I pulled was the Six of Wands. The figure represented here is Yanenga, which is a Mossy legend. Yanenga was a legendary princess and basically is known as the mother of the Mossy people. She was the daughter of West African King Nadeja. Very brave, super incredibly skilled at using the spear and the bow, a better rider than all of her brothers and most of the king's warriors. And by age 14, she was leading her own troops and fighting in her father's wars. So she's just a badass. She was so important to the kingdom that the king basically told her that she was not allowed to marry, ever. Yanenga did not like that. And instead of just like kind of expressing that to her dad, she planted a whole field, but didn't harvest it and let the crops go to waste, and then presented to her father that that was how she felt if she wasn't going to be able to like marry and have children. He didn't like that and got mad, decided to lock her up, but she had so many friends who helped her escape. She rides for a really long time in disguise and happens upon Rial, who was an elephant hunter. He immediately fell in love with her, saw through her disguise, and they were together and had a son, Odrago, which means stallion, because her horse had taken her to Riale's home. Odrago is actually still a really common surname in Burkina Faso since then. She wanted to marry and have kids, and that was her right to do that. And that is what I really like about this story, is presenting that as not a bad thing. It's not bad that she gave up this like career basically to go and find a man. There's something really lovely in that. And we don't hear that rhetoric a lot, and I'm honestly a huge fan of it. The Six of Wands is a card. This card appears when you've reached a really significant goal or a milestone. This card wants you to like put yourself out there, be proud, be open. It is positive encouragement. The prompt that I have for 6 cards, again, a book under 300 pages, and for 1, something adventurous or inspiring. And so I picked the book Siren Queen by Nevo. This is about Lily Wei, who is a Chinese American girl who wants to make it in pre-code Hollywood. So this is the era between 1929 and 1934 when sound began in movies and before censorship guidelines. So there's this wild 5-year period where they could just say whatever the fuck they wanted in movies. But it's also a fantasy book. Basically in this world, the studios that run Hollywood run on a system of blood magic that is powered by the sacrifice of starlets like Lily Wei. That just sounds like it's so up my alley. And like, apologies for the construction going on outside my apartment. There's like not a lot I can do about that right now. So that is the book that I picked for the Six of Wands. The next card that I picked was The Moon Reversed. The story here is Princess Kaguya, which is very sad. This story is also called The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter and is actually considered the oldest surviving Japanese prose narrative, which was found in like the 10th century or something. And it primarily details the life of a girl called Kaguya Hime, who was discovered as a baby inside the stalk of a glowing bamboo plant. So the bamboo cutter discovered this baby, took her home, and his wife and him raised the girl. And he found that every time after this that he cut bamboo, he always found a nugget of gold inside of it. And so the family became very rich, very wealthy. Kaguya grew up to be a gorgeous young woman, and 5 different princes heard of her beauty and came to ask for her hand in marriage. Kaguya is cool and didn't like any of them. What she did was she gave each of them impossible tasks, saying that she would marry the one who could succeed. The first 3 just tried to lie to her to say that they did it, and she saw right through them. The 4th gave up, and the 5th unfortunately died and or was severely injured, depending on what version you read. She was like safe from suitors for a little bit. But after this, the Emperor of Japan wound up coming to ask for her hand, and she fell in love with him, but rejected his proposal, basically saying like she was not of this world and it wouldn't be appropriate for him to marry her. During their kind of like emotional affair, I guess, her parents noticed that whenever Kaguya saw the full moon, she would cry and become really upset. She eventually told them that she had been sent from the moon to Earth. Some stories say as punishment, others say it was for her safety because of a war, and it was about time for her to return to the moon. She gave the emperor a letter professing her love and the elixir of immortality and left because she loved him. She wanted him to be there forever. The emperor was so overcome with sadness that he told his men to take the letter and the elixir to the summit of the mountain that was closest to heaven, which I believe is Mount Fuji, and burn them because he didn't wish to live forever without being able to be with her. It's Very sweet and so sad. The card, the moon, generally symbolizes fear, anxiety, the subconscious. But when it's reversed, you've probably been dealing with that illusion or that fear in some way. And those negative influences are starting to like shut up. You're like working through your shit. So keep doing that. The prompt that I have for the moon cards is a book that you're scared to read. And I like to think of this in like whatever that means to you. That might be a horror novel. That might be something really sad or like super intimidating. What I picked for this one was a nonfiction. I picked Missing from the Village, the story of serial killer Bruce McArthur, the search for justice, and the system that failed Toronto's queer community by Justin Ling. Because I'm currently living in Toronto. That's some real life horror right there. And that honestly is scarier to me than anything that could come up in a horror novel. And so it's a true crime piece set in Toronto about 8 queer men who were killed by serial killer Bruce McArthur and the homophobia and racism within the police department that kept the case unsolved for over 5 years. So that's going to be a hefty boy. But it's been something I've wanted to read for a while, especially living here. I'd like to know more about this community. You know what I mean? That is the book that I picked for the moon. The next card that I pulled we've also seen fairly recently, and that is Judgment reversed. The figure represented here is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. This is the Chinese trickster god who is one of the main characters in the Chinese classic novel Journey to the West. He's born from a giant magical rock and becomes the king of monkeys, goes on a search for immortality. He actually finds it, winning a bunch of battles, getting weapons and superpowers. And so he was so powerful, he decided to take on heaven. That didn't go super well. And Yan Wang, the king of hell, went to get Wukong and dragged him to hell, like dragged him away from heaven. Because Sun Wukong is our trickster god, he convinces Yan Wang to let him go back to Earth. But before he goes back, Wukong steals into like the book of life and death and erases his name and all of the names of his monkey friends, making all of them immortal. You can't fuck with life and death. A whole other war ensues, and finally Buddha was called to solve the situation. He imprisoned Sun Wukong under a mountain for 500 years to teach him humility. A couple hundred years later, a Buddhist monk stumbles upon this mountain and Wukong asks to be released. The monk agrees, so long as Su Wukong would repent and be his disciple. Wukong agreed, became basically like a really pious superhero that helped people for generations. Judgment. Kind of another easy one to understand. Rebirth, inner calling, absolution. It's like one of your final steps before finishing the trip through the major arcana. When it's reversed though, again, it's suggesting you turn inwards and reflect on themes in your life. Past mistakes, regrets, guilt, self-forgiveness, etc. This card usually appears when you're avoiding something in your subconscious and or your inner critic is coming through and basically is telling you to stop doing that. The prompt that I have for Judgment is a book I haven't finished or have DNF'd. I didn't have a book that I hadn't finished that fit under my LGBTQ theme for this month, so I basically just did another random pick. I just spun the wheel again and it landed on Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is a sci-fi comedic fantasy about lesbian necromancers, which is following Gideon, our main character, who's trying to escape a life of servitude in what seems to be a reflection on like the Catholic Church. Also, one character's name is Harrowheart Notogenesis, and that's so fucking funny to me, and I'm really excited to read a comedic fantasy. It sounds like a party. So that was what I picked for Judgment. The next card that I pulled was the Hierophant, also reversed. So we just talked about this story last month. This is the White Buffalo Calf woman. And this woman was a sacred woman who visited the Lakota tribe during a famine, taught them 7 sacred ways to pray, and gifted them the White Buffalo Calf pipe, which is the most sacred object a person can possess, eventually promising to return. The idea is that when a white buffalo calf is born, because it's very rare, it's a sign that their prayers are being heard and the promises of the prophecy are being fulfilled. So I thought it was really cool. In August of '94, a white buffalo calf named Miracle was born on a farm in Wisconsin. She's believed to be the first white buffalo calf born since 1933 and symbolized to the Lakota tribe that humanity was coming together in heart, mind, and spirit. The Hierophant card usually represents like tradition, spiritual wisdom, religious beliefs, even like conformity. When it's reversed, the like most positive aspect of it is reminding yourself that you are your own teacher. You don't need someone else to teach you things. All the wisdom that you're looking for right now can be found within you. My prompt for the Hierophant is a literary book, and so I picked a book I've been wanting to read for a while, and that is Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. This came up in my like 18 books I'm really excited to read in 2022 video. I bought this like 2 years ago and I've never touched it. I really wish people would stop talking outside of my door while I'm trying to do stuff. You guys can listen to this argument for a minute. Are they done? Okay, great. Oh, good. Okay, now I think they're done. A detransitioned baby follows Ames, who has detransitioned after years of identifying as a trans woman and gotten his former partner's boss pregnant. And they're all trying to like figure out how to do the family thing. So this is definitely like a gender exploration book, which I think is really interesting. I've heard good things, I've heard bad things. I'm like very curious to see what this winds up being about. That is the book that I picked for the Hierophant. The next card that I pulled is the Eight of Wands reversed. So this is another Native American tale. The creature represented here is the rainbow crow. Before humans walked the earth, animals were happy. That's literally how the story starts, and like I don't blame them. But one day the earth became very cold and white and snow began to fall. The animals weren't afraid of the snow, but very soon the very small animals started disappearing underneath it. So the mouse went first and then the rabbit. The bigger animals started gathering together to discuss who should go to the creator of the world and ask for the snow to stop. They couldn't decide on who should go until the rainbow crow offered to go himself. He flew for 3 days straight until he reached the 12th heaven, but the creator was too busy to notice him, and so the rainbow crow began to sing, and it was the sweetest, most beautiful song, and the creator stopped to listen and offered to give the crow a gift in return. Rainbow Crow obviously asked the creator to stop the snow, but the creator said that they could not, as the snow spirit ruled the snow. So Rainbow Crow then asked the creator to stop the cold, and the creator said no, but what he would do is give the crow the gift of fire to keep the animals warm until the snow melted. The crow grabbed the stick of fire and hurried back to earth, but as he flew, the soot from the fire turned his feathers black and the smoke blew into his mouth and his beautiful voice became cracked and hoarse. When he finally made it back, all of the animals were under the snow, and he flew around and around and around until the snow had melted and his friends were safe. The animal gave thanks to the Rainbow Crow, and the fire stick became the grandfather of all fires. But Rainbow Crow disappeared alone, crying, for he was no longer beautiful and could not sing sweetly. He was no longer Rainbow Crow, just Crow. The creator saw him and saw that he was upset and basically came down and talked to him and said, soon humans would come to Earth and would take the fire and become master of all the animals. But for being so brave and for offering themselves up, the crow would get the gift of freedom. Man would not hurt them or capture them because they wouldn't provide good meat, and their voice is scratchy, and so they won't provide good music. Within the black feathers, they would shine in the light and reflect all the colors of the rainbow if you look closely enough. And the crow looked and saw tiny rainbows shining in his black feathers and was satisfied. So he returned to his friends in the forest, happy and proud as a black crow with feathers full of rainbows. And honestly, I read this story and I almost teared up. I really, really like this story. The Eight of Wands, this card is about like movement, change, action. So when it's reversed, you might be charging ahead too fast and need to slow down, or you might be resisting change. It might be super practical, like your travel is gonna be delayed, or it could be like really mental, get your life in order so you can pursue your goals kind of deal. The prompt that I have for 8 cards is a diversity read, whatever that means to you. And for Wands, it's something adventurous or inspiring. So obviously we're already having a diversity month. So I picked for this one, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler. This is set in 1993 following Paul, who is a bartender at the only gay club in a university town. But Paul is also a shapeshifter who takes the form of different bodies and genders and has a variety of adventures about town. Honestly, the title Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl is just really fun and drew me to it like right away. So I'm glad I got a chance to read something that I like just discovered. So that's the book that I picked for the Eight of Wands. And so the final card, this is the extra card from our Wheel of Fortune spin, and I pulled the Eight of Coins. The story represented here is the Six Swans, which is a German fairy tale. A king gets like super lost in the forest. I don't know why he's there by himself, but he is. So he asks a witch for help, and she says absolutely, but only if the king marries her beautiful daughter. He meets the witch's daughter, very beautiful, but he's like terrified of her. But he marries her anyway because he has to get out of the fucking forest. He had married before, so this was going to be a second marriage, and he had 7 children with his first wife, but he was so scared of the witch's daughter that he hid them very, like, super deep in the forest, so deep that he needed a ball of magical yarn in order to find them. However, the king loved his children and visited his children so often that the queen noticed and then discovered the magic yarn, visited the children herself, and turned all of them into swans, except for the king's only daughter, who hid super well, basically. The girl ran away through the woods until she found her 6 brothers, who basically, the curse made them able to become human for 15 minutes every day. So the only way she was able to break the spell, they told her, was if she didn't speak or laugh or make any noise out of her mouth at all for 6 years, 1 for each of the boys. And she would have to sew 6 shirts out of asters, which are like little purple flowers, for whatever reason. She starts doing this after a while. The king of a new land finds her, asks her questions about who she is. She obviously wasn't going to respond, and so she didn't, but he was so enthralled with her beauty that he wanted to marry her, which, like, if your wife isn't even talking to you, that's a lot to me, but that's fine. Over the years, they had 3 children, but each time the king's evil mother, who did not think that the girl was worthy because she literally wouldn't open her mouth, stole the children and would smeared blood on the girl's mouth while she was sleeping, claiming that the girl was a cannibal. A couple like weird baby stories on this video. After the 3rd child, the girl still didn't defend herself. The king had no choice but to burn her at the stake, which feels a little dramatic, but I guess he thinks she ate their children. The day of the sentence happened to be the last day of her 6-year penance. I love the timeline of old fairy tales. And so the brothers appeared as swans, like literally as the fire is being lit under her, and she's throwing the shirts over these swans and turning her brothers back into humans. And she was able to tell her husband the treachery of the old woman. The old woman was burnt at the stake for doing such a horrible thing. Their children were brought back to them, and everyone lived happily ever after. Oh, but it is really funny. She didn't quite finish all of the shirts. She like missed a sleeve on one of the shirts, and so the youngest brother forever doesn't have a human arm, has like a bird arm. The card, the 8 of coins, represents like the long haul, the middle of a long project. You are working really hard to improve your skills. So the prompt that I have for this card, the 8 card, is a diversity read again, and coin something tense or funny. And so I picked what I think is the most me book that has ever existed in the world, and that is Affinity by Sarah Waters. This is a gothic, sapphic ghost story set in a women's prison in the 1870s, and like, I can't ask for anything better. That was the final card. That was the whole spread. I will also be reading, on top of everything, the Atlas 6. I'll be buddy reading that with Fran over at Fran Nook in the Pages. We buddy read a lot together, and so that's going to be really fun. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had so much fun putting it together. Again, let me know what you guys are reading. Give me some more LGBTQ recommendations to put on my ridiculously long TBR so that we can continue making these lovely videos forever and ever and ever. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, if you had a good time. Have a fabulous rainbow colored Pride Month, and I will see you guys all very soon with my next video. Bye.